Hello, welcome back to Human Design Book Club. We are talking about the White Book, and today it's pages 53 through 171. It's part two, the whole section on the circuitry of the body graph. We are Jennifer Cordes, 3-5 Sacral Integration Generator, Quadrite Mountains, Kayla Seda, 1-3 Emotional Manifestor, Shores, and Rebecca Anderson, 2-4 Splenic Projector, Quadrite Mountains. And again, this is the Book of Letters by Ra Uru Hu, also called the White Book. And what we are, again, is JKR. We envision a world where everyone can live their truth, everyone can make decisions easily, people are safe to tell their story, people get to have fun together, a community that supports us while giving us the freedom to explore our individual paths. So who wants to jump in with the overview? Channels and gates.
Jen, I think you should do the overview.
I still think I'm very much a heretic or a rebel here. I still resist the idea of the foundation statement that life wouldn't exist without channels. Like, at least when it comes to the top level chart, I can understand it cellularly because in the inanimate or in the cell, they at least have the 515 and then the 3 is open for mutation. So at that point, like, okay, the building blocks of us have a channel. But it's crazy to me when reflectors come in or when your authority is defined by the nodes, which is not always consistent. It's not the same kind of expression. So when I was putting this together, I was resisting my own data entry because I'm like, I mean, I kind of get it and I kind of don't at the same time. What I do really like is that idea of the channels are that second line where it's instrument of a quantum process, where it really is these two completely different things coming together and they make something unexpected and beautiful and mutational and transformative, like 1 + 1 = 10. That part I really do like very much. That one I can get behind. But I just think our reflectors disappearing when we have an eclipse, like that still always kind of cracks my head. I have a hard time with that one.
The tree falls in the forest. Do you hear it? Right?
Yes, exactly. What about those poor reflectors? Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting is he mentions how the 36 channels are rooted in the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. And yet,
Mm,
as most human design people, we don't know a lot about
yeah.
the Kabbalah or the Tree of Life. So it just
Yeah.
really had me like emphasizing that like that's something we may have to dive into one day because there's all this awareness of the astrology aspect, but I mean the channels are basically the foundation of understanding a chart, and yet I understand essentially nothing about Tree of Life. So it just really had me thinking about that.
And I asked my teacher, incredibly well versed, and she's like, yeah, never been talked about. And I'm like, there's something here. I agree
Mm-hmm.
completely. I think that's one of those avenues I'll probably be going down next year.
Yeah, especially because human design does take several different modalities. Like we do kind of talk a little bit about astrology. We do talk a lot about the I Ching. But then there's just this one Kabbalah piece. We don't hear anybody talking about it. So we'll be
Yeah.
excited for you to teach us all, Jen, when you learn
Woo!
about that. And, as we know just from the basics, like the gates each have their unique nature, they have their meaning. And then when it's put together as a channel, then there's an additional meaning, that quantum part of the definition there. Um, like it says at the bottom here, transforms the nature into unique third nature. And we've probably discussed this many times too, the gate still has its theme also. And there's a channel theme, but sometimes I think there's confusion about that or disagreement. But I love how we can each have our own little interpretations or that's the whole point. We read this book and then wow, what do we think about that? Like you were just saying about the channels. So I just love that it gives us so many ways to look at life, basically. And yeah, so we do have these uh slideshow up for anyone who's just listening and wants to check this out. We've got it on the YouTube. And so we talked a lot about the circuits and the streams. The way that this section was laid out was basically by streams and circuits. And I love looking at it that way. I remember when we first learned about circuitry in Rave ABCs. The funny thing is, I was actually disappointed because I wanted to know about the gates and the channels first.
Mm.
But it was so helpful because when you see how they're all connected, you see the themes anyway. And the understanding logic, circuitry, all about the patterns and the future, and the knowing individual circuitry, all about knowing when you read it through this book. So I did appreciate it coming back to the themes of the circuits.
Yeah. And when you look at relationships and how you interact with others, it brings a bigger picture of you're not just looking for the other half of your channel. Like you could really relate to someone because they have a lot of logical circuitry or a lot of individuality. And it's like you have that understanding with the other of like, oh yeah, I get how you work because I work that way too, even if it's not the other half of the channel. Like just
Mm.
the importance of the whole story that the circuits tell. I really liked that aspect.
And to realize too, like he was obviously, well, I mean, at times I think he was hyperbolic, but he was very prone to extreme statements. And when he said that if you're with people who don't contribute to the dominant circuits in your design, you're conditioned away from your natural state and potential. I always wonder about the implications of you can't help where you're born. So if I only have one gate that's tribal, 45, and technically it's not even tribal, it's an expression of the alpha for the Wa. Forgetting all that, I really am not a tribal person. I don't get it. And if I'm born into a very tribal family, what does it suck to be me for the first 20 years of my life? Like, is that just 2 decades that have to be chipped away as I decondition through my experiment? Or is there also this other part where the reason the 3 of us have worked, well, I think one of the reasons we work so well together, so consistently, and for such an extended period is when I was reading this, I thought, oh my gosh, our circuits do make sense with each other. And it isn't so much that Kayla, you bridge us, or, Rebecca bridges me, but there is that part of, even if one of us can't make a meeting, there's still such a common language. It doesn't have to be that a split is bridged for it to work. So it's like, I love what you just said, Kayla, because it isn't just, oh, you have my missing gate, now I'm complete. There really is this sense of, it's kind of like we come from the same place. There's a language that's there, that's established.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a very strong statement to say that if you're with someone that doesn't have your circuitry, you're just going to be conditioned away. I'm like, that's a heavy thing to say.
But it kind of makes sense, right?
I
Like you
know.
said, like if you're born in a
Yeah.
family, it's like,
Yeah.
are you just like too bad? And it's like, well, not too bad, but you're going to notice that other relationships bring out qualities in you that you're like, this is me. I can be me here. Versus if you are born in like a sibling group who their circuits are completely different, it's like you are kind of stuck being like them a little bit if you want to fit in. But then you
Yeah.
find other friendships or other family that it's like, oh wow, like I get them because the circuitry is so looking into the future, or you're just like talking about the past, or it's just these crazy knowing conversations. It's like, oh, it is extreme, but it's also like I kind of get it at the same time.
And
Which
you
is
can,
why if you have a lot of different circuitry, you can kind of fit in a lot of different places.
yes. And you can start to understand where, I have 3 brothers. We've all reacted very differently to the family we grew up in. And some of us will completely stay in that tight nuclear unit, and others will just disperse to the 4 winds. And you can think, well, bad kid, or you just don't speak their language and they made a family somewhere else. I always think there's a lot too, where a parent can even look at their kids and say, why does this one move 10 states away and this one is 10 miles away? And a lot of it
Mhm.
could just be that you make sense to them.
Yeah.
Makes me think of the term the black sheep of
Yeah,
the family. How
yeah.
many of the black sheep just had different circuitry, and
Born
then
under the wrong
therefore there
stars.
was
Yeah.
incompatibility. But one of the things we like to talk about, and here they are again, is, and we kind of started this on our first discussion, is when we're born, you know, did our soul choose the
Mm,
exact time and family to go into in order for this experience to be what it was? And then I was just listening to this psychic who reads people's past lives. And I've never really gotten into that really before, but I was
mm,
really intrigued what he was just talking about, how, now we want to experience this design, this personality, this time. And then that next time there'll be a different chart that you get to
mm.
live your life with, and the others, because it's not just about me. What we're talking about here is how we experience life with everybody else as well. Fascinating.
Can you, before you leave this one, there was that um last line on the tribe. And yeah, also like personality crystals are 13.5 billion years old. So, and I always wonder how much of it is, are you a person every time? Are you a dog? Are you a plant? Like all these different expressions. But yeah, we when we're taught in the foundation classes that the individual can't mutate the collective, it has to start with the tribe. And yet, when you read his line of coming together demands individual sacrifice in the tribe, that kind of makes me wonder, do you have to cut one arm off for the mutation to take hold? Or is it a matter of you try to stay in that tribe while the mutation is taking hold? Versus, if you look at that last line of individual empowerment, that you're empowering individually while remaining resolutely themselves. How does that work in a tribal environment where individual sacrifice is demanded?
I feel like the individual sacrifice kind of gets squeezed in through initiation, right? That
Mm,
2551. Like they're the ones
mm,
that kind of have, they're like in the tribe, right? But they're like slowly mutating people one by one.
mm.
Like that's kind of how I understand that. But I really like the way he described some of these. It's funny how you can like understand so much about these circuits, but then it's like the quote, the outsider whose unique path may be a contribution to others, like that lit something up in me. And then
Mm,
also the tribal support of coming together, even if there is that sacrifice there, it's like if you are around other tribal people, they understand that sacrifice is necessary sometimes. And there, if someone doesn't have any of that, it's like they're not going to get why someone would sacrifice for the tribe. So
yeah,
it's like, yeah, just
I
very
don't get it.
cool.
You're right. I don't get it. I watch it. I grew up with it, and I
Yeah.
doesn't land with me at all.
I thought it was interesting in the individual circuitry. He did talk directly about the individual is there for the collective mutation. And in this particular circuitry, kind of skipped over the tribe stuff. And then, you get to the tribe toward the end of this section. But he's talking about, speaking of mutation, I do remember noting in gate 3, one of the format gates, channel mutation is what it creates with gate 60. And he says mutation can operate in two basic ways. The simplest is the direct mutation through reproduction, which
Mm.
again, there's like a tribal aspect to that as well. But he's talking about it right here in individual gate 3, but it's a sacral gate. And then second form of mutation is through the fulfillment of the knowing circuit, individual expression that through example changes and mutates those who have contact with them. This is cultural mutation. So it's just really interesting for me to think about, like, an individual is here to be themselves, but yet it's all about the collective ultimately in a way. Um, I just and it's not just for themselves, but it is for themselves. So
Mhm,
all of it together.
mhm.
I like that.
And we've mentioned the centers in our last segment, but again, the pressure centers, root and head, and the different streams that are starting from these pressure centers. The root would be going over to the spleen in a spontaneous way, and the root would go toward the solar plexus in a wave. And then from the head, it's over the whole life. These are the different frequencies. I was looking for the
Yeah, yeah,
right
yeah.
word. Um, and so anything here to respond to, Jen,
Yeah,
about these
I
pressures?
loved how he did the 38 and the 39. And it makes me wonder, does that change if it's just a gate versus if it's a channel? Because I always think like that pressure to fight, that does make sense that that's spontaneous in gate 38. Because it really is, I would assume, more about survival, right? It's like, what do I need to get through to be healthy, to keep going? Whereas pressure to provoke 39 on the other side, that I don't have it. I grew up with someone that has it, but it really makes me wonder. I'd have to think back to my childhood. Did that come in a wave? Like, I wonder what that's like for that other person. But what if they're not emotionally defined? When I put this,
Mhm.
I thought it was fascinating. It just raised questions for me because I don't carry those frequencies. I do have the 58 and the 18, which makes me think of, okay, when I have vitality to correct or judge a pattern, that does seem like it just turns on. That doesn't feel like a wave to me. Now, I never know where it's going to come from, but they're also unconscious. And I had never really unpacked in there. To me, spontaneous and unconscious can kind of feel the same thing because I don't see it coming. It's just here it is. But it's not like I feel the rumblings ahead of time. It's just there. So that was really, really interesting. And that might be an interesting reflection for others as if it's a hanging gate versus if it's a channel and what that feels like for them. I
Yeah,
thought that
that's
was
interesting.
interesting. Hmm.
And that's a great thing to think about too. And it's like, okay, if you have 39s, that pressure to provoke comes in a wave. What if you're not emotional? Is
Yes.
that kind of like how we talk
Yes.
about when you're responding each moment? It's like just because you respond for something to buy something doesn't mean like now's the right time, right? It's kind
Yeah.
of like that energy is coming. Maybe it's more that versus like a spontaneous
Hmm.
knowing it's like, yeah, now's the right time versus like, oh, I have energy for this, but I don't have the energy to buy it right now, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
like the energy is, there might be something with that too, like a
Yeah.
slight difference in how some of these work.
Very cool. And I thought, man, that's of course it's him haunting the thinker's mind, but that pressure of the unknown and then whatever is knowable haunts the thinker's mind. And I thought it was so interesting where he talked about that potential of that inner truth is silence. And I thought, to me, I'm under transit influence of 24 for a while now with gate 61. That's like supposed to be conditioning this rave year, my solar year. And I think even though technically it's not me, I'm experiencing it. And it does feel like when that truth has a place to land, which is how I think of the 24. So it'll be interesting to hear you, Rebecca, because I know that's your natural channel. It does feel at times like truth bomb, and there is silence that comes with it because there's no noise, there's no anxiety, there's no stress. It's almost like a spleen in your head. It's like, this is just it.
Mm.
And it's like, and then there's the chaos of, oh, blah, 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 blah. What do I do with it? Blah, blah, blah. But when that hits, it just feels like where the Buddhists would talk about the void. And it's not scary at all. It's just everything is, and you don't have to worry about it. That feels very esoteric to me, very spiritual compared to how he was most of the time.
Yeah, I do love contemplating 61 and 24. As you mentioned, it is one of my three channels. It's the only one I have that is individual, and it's purely unconscious as well. So sometimes I resonate with it, and other times I'm still trying to unpack it. And I do feel like the knowing comes in the pulse, which is key notes for that individual circuitry and that format that starts at the root. But yes, I can resonate with the silence that comes from a knowing, and then there's an unknowing, and it like repeats.
Mm.
And it just, it's always going to keep going. But it's a matter of if we, I guess, relax into it, surrender into it, just like we would surrender into any parts of our design to be able to be ourselves fully. And yeah, these are interesting ones. I was thinking, and they're powerful gates for me, the 61 being my design sun and the 24 my design moon. And it's just like, how does that drive me? And I guess it's just, I've always been a seeker. So here we are seeking human design to understand life, to understand ourselves, understand what is the truth, what is the inner truth and the mystery of life. And I think this is a piece of it. And everything I've learned up to this point is another piece of it. And I think I have another 5 decades to go to learn more pieces of it. Or more. I think I'm going to live over 100. We'll see. That's kind of what I have always been thinking.
Kayla, can you go back 1 second? Kayla, is your struggle spontaneous?
It's a good question. I don't know if I can answer that as an emotional being. I would say probably yes. Like if I know something's worth a struggle, it's kind of a knowing, really is a knowing. But only over time do I know if it's correct for me or not.
If it's what?
If it's correct or not over time because of my emotional wave. I would say typically I just kind of know. I would say it's pretty spontaneous.
That's a good way to reconcile because you're emo authority. And then when we think about you have a full channel there, right? So it's like, okay, what's it like to have spontaneity come through and yet to have a wave be moving at the same time?
Yeah. It's like sometimes I think I'll think, oh, this is neat. And then it doesn't stick. But I can kind of tell the difference between like that intuition versus like a cool idea that just kind of goes away.
Yeah.
It's almost like the inspiration hits differently.
Okay. Thank you.
Spirit awareness. The power of the emotional awareness and its potential to destabilize is the testing ground in humanity's search for the spirit. Spirit is not a concept. It is not an instinct. It is an emotion. And I'm guessing this was talking about 55.
Either that or it was the whole center. I do not remember.
Okay.
I just remember reading this and thinking, I don't know what to do with that. It probably was before it. Because I did these in order. And when I remember thinking like spirit is an emotion, like I always thought it was beautiful when he talked about the solar plexus and that's discovery of the spirit. But then to say that's an emotion, I almost don't know what to do with that. It just struck me.
Yeah, actually, I did find it on
Okay.
page 93, talking about gate 55.
It is 55
Abundance,
then.
the gate of the
Got it,
spirit. I
got
love
it,
the
got it.
name. I love the name of this gate, Abundance, the gate of the spirit. But that is fascinating to really, imagine it as an emotion versus some esoteric thing
Yeah,
out there.
well, the 55 is butting up against the 39, which is like, how do you really feel? That's always kind of how, like, the 39 provokes, like, the real feeling, the real spirit, like, where are you actually at here? And then that is kind of the potential. Is it the possibility or the potential? That for one is second.
Potential. Yeah, potential. Yep, you got
So
it.
knowing how you really feel or not, right? And then it goes up to the 22 to be the possibility of that expression mutate together. So yeah. I could kind of see how it is an emotion because it's like it's being provoked out of you, that actual awareness.
And yet when you talk about the
Absolutely.
wave, it almost seems like you basically want a stability of an emotion, like it's not alive anymore. It's not giving you a lot of hope. It's not giving you a lot of pain. It's basically not bothering you. And it, again, I don't have this, but it seems like, can you get to the point where it's almost like white noise? That doesn't seem like there's any spirit in that. It just seems like it's not irritating you.
Right? Especially when he talks about actually getting to the emotional clarity. It's kind of like it just is what it is
Exactly.
versus like, yeah, yeah. An interesting way to hear about it.
Yeah, that gate 39, I also do not have it defined, but and then we love it that you do, Kayla. But my
I
brother
don't, I have the
had,
55.
oh, that was
Yeah,
it. Okay, I got it wrong. Sorry. So
it's
you're
okay.
representing this side of it.
Yes.
Um, but my brother has it, and also my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law like tends to rub people the wrong way a lot. And it's pretty fascinating. And then my brother also is has a way of, but he also has 38. But there's a wanting to get you to care about life and the world. And it's a it's a provoking, but in a, to me, a way that resonates, that, oh, there's something like alive here too. And I'm just, and we just hang out a couple days ago, so I'm feeling that actual physical feeling of, oh, there's something that's
Mm,
waking me up, is
mm,
another way to look at that one.
mm,
So yeah,
mm,
that's kind of fun.
mm. And
So
especially as a completely open solar plexus, you're going to perceive all that nuance.
good point. Good point. So we have several charts here. If again, if you're listening, if you want to come back and watch and or take a look at our PDFs to check out the charts. But we have a few different pages of the streams. And so starting here with root emotional streams, Jen, would you like to touch on what you found was interesting?
When I began reading this book before we chose it for book club, so I put it down and then I came back to it to come through it formally. But when I was first doing this on my own, I just thought, blah, 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 blah. I learned this stuff in the basics, blah, blah, blah. And, I like to read through stuff and have all my little notes. But then, and I had not been paying attention to the actual layout because it just looked like another way to represent circuitry. And then he was talking about what's the potential, what's the awareness potential. And I was just, my brain was glossing over it until something caught my eye. And I'd been through at least 20 or 30 pages of this stuff. And then he was bringing in the biological issues on the right, which would be, for instance, mood to eat, impulse to eat, need for food access, hunger, thirst recognition. And I stopped cold. And I remember telling both of you, hold on, when you read this, pay attention because this looks like something you would skip past. These biological correspondences I've been fascinated by and very in depth with over the past, I don't know, 18, 20 months at least. And I'd always thought of it as its own thing. But when he was bringing it in here into his second book, and he was pairing essentially the openness, the maybe of gate 12, was saying that's also your eating breathing regulator. And then if you're on a completely different side of the house, like let's say you're looking at the spleen, it had nothing to do with biology, with a few exceptions. And I'm like, what is this about? How do you say clarity, intuitive in the now, and then you're turning around and on the emotional side, there's all these biological correspondences. So I'm reading through, I was digging and digging, and there was one place in like one sentence when he talked about gate 19, and he said, in general, it's potentially oversensitive and easily disturbed when we look at gate 19. At the very bottom of this paragraph, he said, at a biological level, it's about food. And to avoid oversensitivity, it's always necessary for the 19 to have a full refrigerator. Now, going through training, I'd heard that talked about a lot, but not why. And it started to really kind of unlock me in a different way, because I don't carry these root to throat activations, with one exception at gate 35, and it is on the design side. And I mean, I was anorexic for more than half my life. I barely ate. And I have a completely open solar plexus, and I grew up with a tremendous amount of emotion in the house. And I know it's a big deal now, because I've been eating for a while now, but part of my healing is I actually recognize when I have a feeling. My responses used to be so delayed that I might not even have a response for days, 5, 6 days. And all of a sudden something pisses me off and it took a week, not exaggerating. And then it got to be hours. And then it got to be maybe 10 minutes later, but it's happening. And when I was looking at this, it made me wonder with gate 35, because I never let myself be full. I didn't experience satiety. I didn't want to deal with myself. I didn't want to deal with my emotions, let alone anybody else's. No feeling could manifest. And it started to make me look at this in a completely different way, as over the past, how old am I? I think 9 years now that I've actually been eating, past 5 or 6, where I've been more healthy and what I would feel like grounded. And then when I look at the past 2.5 years of deconditioning, as I go through this, I can just start crying. And I'm thinking, the emotions are finally moving because I'm not starving all the time anymore. And like that one sentence, I thought, oh my God, that's what gate 35 was doing. But it made me wonder, because I don't carry any of these gates, it made me wonder about the rest of them. Like, for instance, whether it's conscious or unconscious, when you want to talk about someone who has gate 41, that's kicking off that whole process. If you never let yourself get hungry, I'm not saying starve or do what I did, but if you never even have a feeling of, oh, I'm hungry, now I know whatever is the right thing to eat, what does that do to your wave? And even if you're not emotional, what does that do to your ability to feel the emotion around you, let alone the emotion that is yours? So anyway, that was like a huge answer. That really stirred something. And it was like, it's true, Ra. It was his mic drop and it was buried, because you could read all of these and he didn't explain that I saw why there were those biological correspondences on the emotional side, but not the splenic, with the exception of the thirst. So I just
and
thought that was
he touched
fascinating.
a little bit on the splenic side about how it's like you could just like not listen to something, right?
Yeah.
Like the biologics of just like
Yeah.
kind of tuning things out. It couldn't even be something that you're aware you're doing. You're just like choosing to not listen to certain things. It's like your instincts are biologically tuning things out for you. It's like you don't even hear it, right? So he did a little bit, but not as specifically when it comes to the body functions of that one. And that is very interesting too. Like, is there a difference between being aware of that and just your body doing it for you?
Yeah.
And how does that manifest and look for everyone? So when you're going through this book, you can really look at what you have and if it's conscious or unconscious and how he describes these things and how you experience them. Because there could be something interesting kind of deep within this information.
Because especially, you have gate 36, right, Kayla?
Yes. And mine is conscious.
So then I would wonder, if you want to apply, because my 35 is unconscious. So if you want to say you're conscious, is the way you're mentally dealing with your emotions, right? Not the body's having it and what's the story, or the way you're viewing it. How does that affect your ability to generate the feeling and to go through that hope and pain cycle? Because I would wonder if at times, if mentally you're resisting whatever is going on with your wave, if you have issues with even recognizing hunger or knowing how to deal with it.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to just start observing
Just to
a little bit
watch.
better. Yeah.
Versus for me, body wise, I couldn't experience an emotion if I wanted to. And I think that might be the difference between conscious or unconscious, because I struggled with this for a while of, what do you do if it's red or it's black? Like, it's still part of you. It's just, is it coming from the bottom up or is it coming from the top down? Are you watching it happen, or did it bubble up and now you deal with it?
This just made me hungry.
Well, and it's interesting to get your viewpoint too, Rebecca, because you're like you carry gate 19 and I know you like to have a full refrigerator. Do you notice at times, does that help with what you perceive as being sensitive or oversensitive? Like, does it make a difference?
I would have to definitely contemplate a little bit more on the literal fridge being full compared to sensitivity. But I know I love a full fridge, and I know that there is a lot there with either being sensitive or being oversensitive. Sensitivity levels can vary
Mm.
for sure. And I also have 41, so that provides a little bit of
Mm.
fuel there on that side as well, the sensing. And I was just thinking we each have three different gates
Mm.
in that stream
Mm.
about hunger and how that also corresponds with our emotions. So that's kind of interesting how it's three different ones there.
And
But
and
I
how
can definitely I can definitely relate that fullness or hunger can play a role in how much I'm feeling emotions or not.
uh,
Um, mhm.
yours or when you're dealing with your husband's wave or both?
Mm,
Because you live, reason I ask is you live with an emotional
yeah.
person, right? Yeah.
Hmm. Right. So no, I've definitely been able to become way better at recognizing when his wave is happening and
Mm.
I'm experiencing that amplified emotion, to be able to try to step away and try to let it cleanse through and not have it be about me. But I don't know if I put that together with the fullness
Mm.
or hunger quite yet. I do know that I have used food to like numb
Mm.
before. Um, so I would assume they go together. But
Mm.
whether or not, it's for mine or his, it's probably for either any
Mm.
emotion that's like happening. Um, however much food or not is in my system is gonna have an impact on
Mm.
that.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is. What else do we have here? Obviously, maybe not obviously. Let me rephrase. To me, the stream of taste is one of my favorites. Um, it's one that we share here with three parts each. We all share the judgment channel, insatiability, and then some have 48, some have 16. But as much as Ra has in other places disparaged this stream, basically, in this one, I felt like he gave it a proper and
Mm.
kind of fair assessment.
Mm.
Maybe I was looking at it from that lens because we've discussed this in depth in many ways, whether it comes to incarnation cross or other description of these gates. Um, but the vitality to recognize what needs to be corrected for the benefit of the collective, that I see that as, obviously it's natural to us, but it's beautiful because it's bettering.
Mm.
But it's also strange to me to imagine when people don't have this channel defined, because I thought it was just so natural and normal. Like, I can now see that it's not for some people. And what we have is a gift, But it can be so easily misinterpreted or misused. Do
Yeah,
y'all
that's
have
such
any
a great
thoughts on
point that
any
it's
of
like
these?
whatever definition you have, you kind of assume it's the norm, right?
Yeah.
You're just like, if everyone's like this, right? Because it's so just who you are, you've never not been that. And then to learn that there's all these different life forces, it just goes back to our conversation at the beginning about how it's like when people have kind of the same streams as you or circuitry, it's like, oh, I get that,
Mhm.
right? It's like for someone to not have like the some of these channels, it's like, what do you mean you don't see all the problems in the pattern? Like, can't you see we need to fix this?
Yeah.
And some people are like, well, now that I'm with you, I see that you like to fix things. I don't want to. So it's just, yeah, it's always fun to learn about those.
And I kind of wonder too of that lower expression, especially 18:3 when he talks about it in the incarnation cross. I've noticed at times in my life where I can be in that lower expression of it. Obviously, you're not happy when you're all that negativity is coming out of you, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. But I wonder how much of it is as a quadrite, and I do have a lot going on in gate 48. It's like, what are you filling your cup up with? Right. So, okay, I can always look at something and say, yes, that could be better and that could be better. But if there are so many other wonderful ways to occupy your time or to see the benefit of how it could be perfected and to trust that it will get perfected in its own way or process with the right people, if I haven't responded to it. So I always think that's another thing with these channels is there's your overall type and strategy, and then there's the actual type of the channel that is a projected channel, which means, theoretically, you're supposed to be asked to do that. You're not supposed to go butting yourself in. And then when you're asked as a generator, do I respond to doing that? Or Rebecca, do you recognize that that's an appropriate, does that feel safe? Does that contribute to well-being? Kayla would be her wave, but that's inside of that too. So I always think whenever you're reading about your gates or your channels, is like, don't forget, it doesn't mean that you're condemned or that you're stuck with it. It's overall, it's like, what else are you doing? It's like if you just sit around finding a bunch of negative things to talk about and find about people that will listen to you and that will complain with you, like maybe that feels good for 2 minutes. But then it's like you just pooped in your own well. Why do you want to drink that water? So I think there's a lot of this too that's somewhat sorry. But it's kind of the truth, right?
Gross.
But it's like
Good one
how
though.
what do you want to embody? And I think there's just so much more to this than getting in these like insular descriptions, because he was trying to get a very strong point across at times, and he was trying to make sure it landed. You always want to remember his language very often was much more emphatic than maybe it would have been otherwise. Yeah. I take that
Yeah.
18 kind of hard because it's my son and his description of it is not pleasant. So yeah,
Just remember, we have good taste.
there you go.
Mhm.
Anything you wanted to touch on with this, the liquid, or you kind of already did mention it?
Mm.
I think so.
All right, let's see what else we got. We did already kind of touch on the 61 that we share. These are some head streams here. And the titles correspond with the circuitry themselves. So
Mm.
I always liked that little trick when I was trying to remember. um, Wonderful. Well, I think we're getting close to wrapping up. Were there any final thoughts that either of you wanted to touch on with this incredible section of this book?
There was one other thing I thought was neat that he did, and I don't remember what page it was on. I should have written that down. But he was talking about the expression and the flow in the stream. Like he was talking about the expression and the flow of the energy, but then he kind of synthesized them in a way that it's like they weren't with the streams. So there was like a little box in there, and it said like the expression was 16, but then it also had 48, 18, and 58, right? So those are not in the same stream. And then it said, I experiment for satisfaction. So he kind of like mixed, and I don't know if you guys caught that or not, but he was mixing the streams and information, and then the expression of the 31 he did with the 7 and then the 515. So then those are two different, I mean, they're still collective,
Oh,
but they're the opposite ones. And he said, I lead to ensure the flow. And so he kind of like mixed and mashed, and it was a good example of how everything works together, even when you don't think it works together. So I thought that was kind of cool because he did like the 16, the 48, which is the and then the 8, oh wait, those are all in the same stream. Maybe I'm actually confusing
You're
myself
talking
here.
about
But he was
voices
kind
of
of,
the throat.
yes, and he was synthesizing them based
Mhm.
on 4 different gates together, which I
Mm.
thought was kind of cool.
Because especially in the tantric, it's gonna flip. Yes,
Yes,
I know what you're talking
but
about.
he
Yes,
he
you'll
did
have a
them
combination
straight.
of yeah, that's the
Mhm.
tantric one. Can you go right, Rebecca?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably these.
Just wondered.
Yes,
Because you're
that was
no,
it.
no, the other one. You're mixing. So you can start off with 52.9 and then you're flipping. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
so
straight up.
he just
Yes.
kind of like synthesized well, kind of a cool way to look at like what pieces you have and how you can put them together based on
Yeah.
the voice that you have. So I thought that was kind of cool.
And how, especially with these tantric circuits, it's one thing to have things be maybe more mechanical expressions. And even though G technically would be as well, but you're bringing through the self, right? It's coming up basically straight through literally the higher self. That's very different than something that's just running up about, let me fix this pattern.
Mhm.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. So I actually feel like I got a lot more out of this section than I was expecting. I kind of just thought it would be like a basic copy and paste from like reading the complete Rave I Ching, but I feel like there was more nuggets than you would expect. So if you skipped over this section, it might be worth diving into. So it was a good one.
And taking your time with it, because like I said, my first pass, I was skimming until I caught those biology keynotes and I thought there's something else going on here. Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree.
Absolutely. I'm always looking for a nugget whenever I'm reading something, even if it's something that, I think would be kind of basic. It's like, what is this here to teach me now, this
Mhm.
time? So we are looking forward to seeing you again in our next segment, and we will see you later.